A landowner walks into the marketplace at 6 in the morning and hires workers for his vineyard. He agrees to pay them a denarius for the day. Fair wage, fair work. But he goes back at 9, at noon, at 3, even at 5 in the afternoon, an hour before quitting time, and hires more. And when the sun goes down, he pays the 1-hour workers first, a full denarius. The 12-hour workers watch this happen and they do the math in their heads. If the last one's got a full day's wage for 1 hour, surely we're getting more. But when their turn comes, they get the exact same denarius, and they complain. Matthew 20:12. These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden and the heat of the day. That parable sits right in the middle of one of the most uncomfortable questions in the New Testament. Does God reward every Christian the same, no matter how much they've done, no matter how long they've walked with Him? Because if you read that parable by itself, the answer seems to be yes. But if you read the rest of the New Testament, you run into passage after passage that seems to say the exact opposite. Crowns, degrees of reward, some work that survives fire and some that burns up completely. So which is it? Is heaven a flat wage, or is it a graded exam? That's what we're going to sort through today. And the answer is more precise and honestly more freeing than most people ever get taught. Let's start with the passage most people don't know exists. 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Paul is writing to a church that's already obsessed with ranking their favorite teachers, and he uses an illustration from construction, verse 11 through 15. For no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become clear, for the day will declare it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test each one's work, of what sort it is. If anyone's work which he has built on it endures, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he himself will be saved, yet so as through fire. Read that carefully, because almost every detail in it is doing something specific. The foundation is fixed. It's Jesus Christ. And Paul says no one can lay a different one. That's salvation. That's not up for grading. Everyone who is in Christ has the same foundation. Full stop. But what gets built on top of that foundation is a different category entirely. Gold, silver, precious stones on one side, wood, hay, straw on the other. And notice the test isn't a checklist someone hands you. It's fire. The day will declare it. Something is coming that exposes what your life was actually built out of, and not everything survives contact with it. Here's what's easy to miss. The person whose work burns up is still saved. Verse 15 says so directly, but look at the language around it. He suffers loss, and he is saved so as through fire, which is the kind of phrase you use for someone who barely got out of a burning building. Nothing in their hands, clothes singed, alive but empty-handed. So Paul is describing two believers standing in the same place at the same moment, both saved, both accepted, and one of them walks away with something, and one of them walks away with nothing but their life. That's not a contradiction of grace. That's a description of what grace actually protects and what it doesn't automatically reward. Now, hold that next to the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, because it fills in exactly what kind of building material Paul might be talking about. A master gives one servant 5 talents, another 2, another 1, according to their ability, and leaves. The 5-talent servant doubles it. The 2-talent servant doubles his. The 1-talent servant digs a hole and buries it out of fear. When the master returns, verse 21 and 23 record him saying the exact same sentence to both the 5-talent servant and the 2-talent servant. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Notice that. The man with 5 talents and the man with 2 talents receive identical praise, identical language, identical joy. Nobody tells the 2-talent man he underperformed. The measure was never the size of what he started with. It was what he did with it. Which means the workers in the vineyard and the servants with the talents aren't actually contradicting each other. They're answering 2 different questions. The vineyard parable is about the wage of salvation, the denarius, which every single laborer receives in full, regardless of when they came to the field. Whether you gave your life to Christ at 8 years old or on your deathbed, the wage is the same, because the wage was never something you earned by the hour. It was a gift the landowner chose to give. But the talents parable is about something else entirely: stewardship. What you did with what you were given after the wage was already secured. And that's a completely different ledger. If you want to see the ledger get named specifically, Paul goes there again in 1 Corinthians 9. He compares the Christian life to an athlete in the Isthmian Games, which is the kind of comparison the Corinthians would have understood instantly, since the games were held right outside their city. Verse 24 through 25. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. There it is. The word crown, Stephanos in the Greek, which wasn't a royal crown, it was a victor's wreath, the thing they put on your head when you cross the finish line first. Paul isn't saying everyone who runs gets the wreath. He's very specifically saying one receives the prize, and then telling the Corinthians to run so that they obtain it. That's not the language of a guaranteed, evenly distributed outcome. That's the language of a race with an actual finish line and an actual result. And once you start looking for the word crown in the New Testament, it shows up constantly, and every time it's tied to something specific, not to salvation in general. 2 Timothy 4:8, Paul's final letter from a Roman dungeon, the one we've talked about before on this channel. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. That crown is tied to a specific thing: loving his appearing, longing for Christ's return enough to live differently because of it. James 1:12 ties a crown to endurance under trial. Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life. 1 Peter 5:4 ties a crown to faithful shepherding of God's people. When the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. 4 different crowns, 4 different specific behaviors they're tied to: righteousness pursued through longing for Christ, endurance through suffering, faithful spiritual leadership. These aren't badges everyone gets for showing up. They're described as things some believers pursue and others don't. And Paul talks about them the way you'd talk about something you could actually lose. 1 Corinthians 9:27, right after the crown passage, he says, I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest, when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Paul, the man who wrote half the New Testament, says he's disciplining himself because he could still be disqualified from the prize. Not from salvation. Paul is not in danger of losing his salvation, and he says so elsewhere with complete confidence, but from the reward that sits on top of it. Here's where all of this actually lands. There are 2 separate categories running through the New Testament, and people collapse them into one all the time, which is exactly why the vineyard parable and the talents parable feel like they're arguing with each other. Category 1 is entrance, whether you get into the kingdom at all, and that is never based on merit, never based on hours logged, never based on comparison to anyone else. It's the denarius. It's the foundation Paul says no one can lay but Christ. It's given, not earned, and it's given in full to everyone who's in him, the same to the first hour and the same to the last hour, the thief on the cross and the apostle who walked with Jesus for 3 years. That's the gospel, and if you try to turn it into a wage scale, you've broken it. But category 2 is inheritance. What you do once you're standing on that foundation, what you build with it, how you steward what you were given, whether 5 talents or 2, whether much or little. Whether you ran the race to obtain the prize, or you just kind of jogged along, not particularly trying to win anything. That's the crown. That's the gold, silver, and precious stones versus the wood, hay, and straw. And Paul is bluntly honest that some of what believers build will not survive the fire, even though the person themselves is safe. Why does this distinction matter practically? Because it protects you from 2 opposite errors at the same time. The first error is thinking your reward earns your salvation, which turns grace back into a transaction and makes God's acceptance of you conditional on your performance, which is exactly the anxiety the vineyard parable is written to shut down. Nobody who worked 1 hour needs to worry they got less of Christ than the person who worked 12. The second error, though, is just as real and gets talked about a lot less. And that's assuming that because entrance is free, nothing else you do actually matters. That your faithfulness or your laziness, your endurance or your quitting, your 5 talents multiplied or buried in the ground, all wash out to the exact same result in the end. And Paul goes out of his way more than once in more than one letter to say that isn't true. The fire tests the work. The day will declare it. Some things survive and some things don't, and it's worth asking yourself honestly which pile your life is currently being built into. There's something almost comforting in how specific this gets if you sit with it, because it means the small, unseen, unglamorous parts of your life, the faithfulness nobody's watching, the 2 talents nobody thinks are as impressive as somebody else's 5. None of that gets lost in some cosmic rounding error where everyone ends up equal regardless. The master's response to the 2-talent servant wasn't smaller than his response to the 5-talent servant. It was identical. Well done, good and faithful servant. Which means the question was never whether you had 5 talents or 1. The question was only ever whether you were faithful with what you actually had in your hand. So if you're asking whether God rewards every Christian the same, the honest biblical answer is both yes and no, and the difference matters more than either answer alone. Yes, in the sense that mattered most, the denarius, the foundation, entrance into the kingdom itself, that's identical for everyone in Christ, and nothing you do adds to it or subtracts from it. But no, in the sense of what gets built on top of that foundation, what survives the fire, what earns the crown, that is genuinely, specifically, personally different for every single believer, based on what they were given and what they did with it. And maybe the most freeing part of all this is that the standard was never comparison to anyone else's 5 talents. It was only ever faithfulness with your 2. If this study helped clarify something you've wrestled with, subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. That's genuinely how this keeps reaching people. Thank you for being here. God bless you.